Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to welcome on stage our next keynote speaker, Joanna Taylor, Partner Advisory Markets Life Sciences, Ernst & Young AG, who's going to speak on the topic of the role of data and emergent technologies in managing health. A big round of applause. The mic is yours, and this is yours as well.
It's all right.
Okay, are you going to manage?
I'll manage. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Gosh, that's a very bright light. So first of all, we're going to start off with a bit of a video. Thank you very much for having me, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion after this. So if we can play the video, that would be great.
We are living longer, but we are not living better. By 2050, 25% of the global population will be over 65, and many will be unwell. As the number of people with chronic diseases increases, the costs of care are crippling governments, businesses, and individuals. Today, our care is fragmented, and our health data is siloed. But that is starting to change. Health is being reimagined in ways that fuse the digital, physical, and biological worlds. Increased customer expectations and rapid technological advances are reshaping the healthcare industry, shifting power among traditional stakeholders and creating opportunities for new entrants. Newly empowered superconsumers are driving this change, calling for more engaging, connected care. As demands for proactive, personalized health increase, data-driven algorithms that improve outcomes will become the most valuable healthcare products. To make this reimagining our reality requires a new, shared approach. One of collaboration, one of convergence. What could a healthier future look like?
So that's just to get us started. I think what I'd like to sort of highlight here is that there's a lot of things going on in the industry. We've heard a lot about those over the past day, and we'll also hear about them over the coming days as well. But this is what we're starting to sort of, I'll summarize some of that, but then also talk about what are the key data trends that we're seeing across the sector, and then also what the implications are for organizations' business models. So if we're looking at what is it that the different stakeholders really want, so most of them are looking for cost-effective care. However, you've got the pharmaceutical companies that have spent a lot of money developing products and services, and they actually want to be able to capture the value of that. And so for them, also reimbursement is key. And so trying to sort of balance that in a very complex stakeholder network is quite a challenging feat. But actually what we're seeing is although that these may appear conflicting, are actually with the new business models, they're actually moving towards much more shared goals. So business models have evolved over time. I'm sure many of you will have come across this over the recent decades. So originally it started off with 1.0, which was all around the blockbuster, very product-centric business models. It was all about selling medication and pushing its volume. Then it moved to much more diverse product portfolios, which is also an evolution. So that became 2.0. Then 3.0 came along, which was all around outcomes. So actually not just about pushing medication, but actually being able to demonstrate the outcome and the value associated with it. And now we're moving much more into what we call the fourth industrial revolution. Those of you who are familiar with that from the World Economic Forum, this is all around what happens next, and it's all really around data-driven platforms. So there's a huge proliferation of data out there, but what do you do with that data, and how do you get value from it? So where is this data coming from? I mean, there's so many statistics out there about the volume of data and how quickly it's being produced. There's lots of different sources. I mean, these are just a few examples. You can see the social media platforms. I mean, that's a very common one. It's also one that's dear to my heart due to my research into the use of social media by patients with chronic conditions. and sort of the insight that you can gain from that. There's also augmented reality. So the FDA approved Novarad's Open Insight augmented reality system, which is all around supporting surgeries. There's a lot of data associated with that as well. Robotic surgeries. So J&J has recently bought earlier this year a company that focuses on robotic surgery as well. And then a lot of the next generation electronic health records, where patients are actually being able to sort of grant permissions to the different stakeholders in their care ecosystem to access that data. And also, I mean, sensors and wearables. I think a lot of people have iPhones and Apple Watches and Fitbits, etc. So those are a very common source of what was referred to yesterday as real-world data. So this is all lots and lots of data sources that are then being reflecting sort of the experiences of the patient. Which screen? That screen? Oh, here we go. Yeah. So what are the this sort of rise in the data? People talk about digitalization a lot, digital transformation. It's a real buzzword, but actually digitalization means nothing without data, the datafication as well. There's no point in doing digital unless you're going to do something with the data. So why is this important? The patients are becoming much more proactive in their care. They have an expectation to be involved in their care. They're much more informed than they used to be. Connected devices. So this was referred to yesterday around, in one of the presentations about people who have a chronic condition. Diabetes is a good example of that, where they have to continuously manage it. MS is another example as well. They have to continuously manage that condition. And so connected devices is becoming really important. And actually where the value is coming from, or the most highly valued asset that an organization will have in the future, is their data. And actually what's interesting there is also there's no single owner of that data. No organization, no individual, no health care practitioner or health system owns that data. It's really about sort of sharing that data within the constraints of some of the regulations and privacy regulations that exist, but actually being able to share that data and the flow of that information around the ecosystem. So I mentioned the sort of evolution of care models and how patients are actually becoming much more proactive in their care. There's a real shift towards patients owning their data and the ecosystem around them to support that. Technology, I think there's some presentations coming up over this afternoon and tomorrow around care at home. So the technology is evolving to a point where people can actually sort of receive care at home. And we see some of these sort of examples of robots, for example, helping the elderly, things like that. That's a really important element of being able to sort of offload or share some of the responsibility around people's care models. And that's sort of evolving in the industry. Physicians, which were traditionally seen as an authoritative figure, are actually becoming much more of a guiding and collaborative role within a patient's health journey. And AI, I mean, we mentioned it yesterday about artificial intelligence and how that's really important in terms of being able to analyze that data and get the value from it. So that's a little bit of context setting, but what I want to be able to show you now and talk to you now about is some of the 5 key data trends that we are seeing. One is around value. I alluded to that earlier. One is around the other one is around sources of the data and the AI. So really about the nervous system, as we would call it. So the data is the nervous system. Technology and the technological digital backbone. So this is really about the infrastructure around a sort of sharing and mobilizing that data. Then the power shift. So this is around the patients taking more power in their health experience. And then finally, the evolving business models that are really important for organizations that want to work within this sector. So I mentioned the data. There's so much of it. It exists very much in silos. And actually, no organization, as I said, can own all the data. No organization, no individual. And actually, what it's really about is trying to create capital efficiencies. So no organization or individual can carry the cost burden associated with having all that data as well. So it's all around capital efficiencies and being able to kind of direct and focus on where you want to spend your money. And actually, this is where some of the ecosystem has evolved, where actually it's not about just doing everything yourself, but actually being able to either acquire that data or acquire that knowledge or that technology or the algorithms, but also the alliances that exist around that. So you hear a lot about that in the press, new alliances being formed. These are vertical alliances and horizontal alliances where we see a convergence within the industry. I talked about the value of the data. Historically, it was all about monetizing the data and what can you get from it in terms of the monetary value. Where this is moving to is much more around the future value. So this is really about innovation by the power of data. And that sort of innovation is really around personalization and outcomes. And then also from a data perspective, it's how connected is the data? How can you combine the data? Can you share the data? And this is really about achieving value through outcomes. I mentioned this difference. This is the second trend around the sources of the data. So we've touched upon this, some of this already, but what's really interesting is what is available now, what is coming, and what is beyond. So this is really about, we have all kinds of sensors. We have those that can be ingested and embedded. We have those that are wearables. These are the ones that people most commonly refer to. The environmentals and home sensors as well. So this is all these are different sources of data. And a really good example of the embedded one is the ingestible smart pill from Proteus that was approved in 2017. So that's something that was a pill that included a computer chip. And actually you're able to transmit information about your body to an app. Another example is the DNA-based micro-robot, which can go in and which was approved and can attack tumor tissues. These are really sort of high-end technology solutions that are actually producing data and also sharing data with the ecosystem. So I mentioned it's about not just about data, but actually being able to do something with it, and this is where artificial intelligence comes into play. There's a really good example yesterday, I think from Destiny, that talked about this. So this is really about turning data into actionable insights. And actually, what's interesting is that since 2013, there's been over 30 approved algorithms by the FDA, which shows that actually it's not just about medication anymore and pills, but actually about, and services as well, but actually about how you manage and how you analyze the data that you have. And that can have lots of implications around lots of different areas within the ecosystem. So for example, disease diagnosis, behavioral intervention, we've talked about clinical trials as well, and how that's really important too. The third trend is around the infrastructure. So this is about the digital backbone, so historically, we have grown up in an industry where there has been lots of legacy systems, lots of different formats. There's no standard format or anything like that, or a universal standard that allows you to share on combined data as easily as we would like to. So the move is around sort of being able to kind of open source that, use of APIs, and actually around the storage mechanisms around it. Because frankly, if you've got all this data, you have to be able to store it as well, and that has its own implications. So this is sort of examples of, there's plenty of examples in the industry around Google and Flex Health to create Bright Insight, and Carebox and Apple. So these are all around sort of creating this technical infrastructure that enable organizations to bring together the data, combine it, share it, and we talk often about platforms. And we see platforms as being the sort of interfaces that allow existing and new stakeholders to connect and share data. And it's really, as I said before, around sort of improving health outcomes as a consequence of that. I'm conscious of time, and I want to give it enough time for Q&A as well. So I'm going to speed through these, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts afterwards. The power shift, this is the fourth trend. So this is the power shift in terms of, historically, it was all about the industry, and industry sort of having the power, whether that be the life sciences industry or the regulator or the healthcare system. But actually what we're seeing is that patients are starting to have the power within this ecosystem. They want to own their data. They want to give access to it to whoever they choose in a controlled way. They also have an expectation around having their healthcare experience similar to their retail experience or similar to their banking experience. So those that we're sort of living in a time where people access their bank accounts online through apps. They do it from their couch watching television in the evening and things like that. They no longer have to go into a bank. And that's something that is an expectation of those that are patients as well with regards to their treatment. So they're becoming much more actively involved, and they have higher expectations there. The fifth and final data trend that we're seeing is that all this has an impact on the business models that exist within the sector. So there's sort of 4 different business models that we refer to. One of them is the breakthrough innovator. And they all use I have to say, they all use their data in very different ways and should prioritize their data in certain ways. Because this is all around where they want to place their bets. So placing bets, not hedging bets, because there's only so much funding available to them. So breakthrough innovators, this is where the traditional pharmaceutical companies tend to sit. This is all around leveraging your R&D data. This is where you have, and getting insights from that to create innovative medicines. This tends to be high margin. It tends to be very personalized and sort of shifting towards sort of more innovative products associated with personalized medicine. So the example, there was an example that came up yesterday that was around CAR-T and CRISPR. This is one of those examples that would sit in that bucket. Disease managers. These are the ones that are looking at the end-to-end patient experience. So this is all around those that focus on managing chronic conditions. If we take diabetes, for example, that came up yesterday, the patients that are living with that condition are using lots of different tools. They've got lots of different devices. They've got capturing lots of data as a consequence of that, but not all of it is connected. So this is where the disease managers will play in terms of connecting that data to really give that end-to-end patient experience. Lifestyle managers, these are more around the wellness side of things. So there's the use of sort of consumer data. It expands to include things like nutrition as well as sort of health-related data. And this is really about being able to predict and consumer behaviors or patient behaviors and preventative measures. Efficient producers, this is very much in the generic space. This is where it's all about your sort of optimizing your supply chain. Think about Amazon, for example. There's a lot that, for example, the pharmaceutical and generics industries can learn around how to create operational efficiencies through the use of that data. This is, as I said, low margin. It's all around cost efficiency and getting those products out. And these have very different requirements, as I sort of alluded to, with regards to the data. I mentioned around sort of delivering best-in-class efficacy through the innovators. This is much more around product effectiveness and the R&D data. The use of sort of the end-to-end continuum of care for the disease managers, much more around sort of personalized patient outcomes. Consumer-centric services. So this is end-to-end sort of end-user interactions and creating sort of nudges and predictive measures to be able to sort of influence people's behavior. And then, of course, the operational margins and being able to sort of deliver commodity products better. So really creating efficiencies around that. So I've just summarized these sort of very quickly summarized these 5 trends. I'm happy to go into much more detail, but I thought it would be useful for the benefit of the audience here if we sort of went into some more of the Q&A as well. So these are some of the things that we would sort of encourage organizations to do. Don't just think about doing digital for the sake of doing digital. Really think about how it aligns with your strategy and your business model. And if it doesn't, then actually think about how do you adapt that? Where do you want to be in the future? And really think about not just the technology, but actually the data associated with it as well. And how do you leverage that to get the outcomes? Because actually, as I mentioned before, it's not about monetizing that data anymore. It's really about the value of that data and creating future value through the outcomes that it generates. Thank you very much. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, so I'm happy to take some.
Thank you. I'll start with one.
Yeah.
Manish here. What's your view on the pivotal trial of new entity development? So we have 500 patients, 250 patients receiving active ingredient, and 250 getting placebo, yeah? We published the primary endpoint, secondary endpoint, comes to conclusion, yes, it's efficacious and it's safe.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this from last 100 years. And post-marketing surveillance data have not been captured in a way where those 500 patients' data being extrapolated to 7 billion population on the planet, and that medication will behave exactly same in all of those genotypes and phenotypes. Why does not pharmaceutical industry would like to do that when they have every single medicine's data, how many patients taking their medication, what sort of adverse event is being reported, pharmacovigilance is there, FDA is there, TGA is there. Why we are not evolving with that time when it comes to the data? So what's your view on that?
Sorry, why are they not involving the tech giants, did you say?
So we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about data, we talk about gathering it, yeah? We have medications in the marketplace from last 20 years.
Yes.
But we're still relying on the pivotal trial, which we submitted to the regulatory, which was based on only 500 patients.
Yeah.
We have not done anything about post-marketing surveillance data of those medicine.
Yeah. So I would say silos exist within organizations as well. So within the pharmaceutical companies, silos exist around those data too. So this combining is not just about combining with external partners and being able to get those insights, but actually being able to bring together that data internally. And that legacy data, as I said, in different formats is really, really challenging. I know there's quite a few organizations that are working to do that. But also you've got to, the format and the quality of data is also variable. So it's certainly going to come, but it's very it's been a very challenging journey for many organizations to be able to do that. So it's not just about the data within organizations, but actually external to the organization, but also the data within organizations too. We need a lot more sort of sharing and less silos in the future to be able to make this work.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Here.
The mic's
Here,
always
yeah.
at the back. Can we have a mic at the front? We've got two here with questions.
Yeah, sure, I'll pass it on. Here, to your.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the power shift where the physicians, the caregivers, the power is going to shift down on their side, and the technology companies, the consumers, are going to have an upward shift in terms of their power over the healthcare market. So my question to you is precisely the hospitals where technology is more of a support layer currently for them in their business model. How do they transform themselves into a technology company? Try to bring technology layer from the support layer to a governing layer. So what are the top 3 things that, or 4 things or 5 things that they should do to undergo a technological transformation where technology is one of those governing layers in their business model?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think so people get very excited about new technologies. I remember when I started, well, not even when I started, but earlier in my career, it was all around, oh, we need to be digital. We need to have an app. We need to do social media. We need to have a portal. So a lot of organizations, healthcare sort of organizations and hospitals and things like that, as well as life sciences organizations, really went out and did that. The problem was that they built these beautiful portals that nobody used because they didn't really understand why they were doing it and who the audience was. And they also didn't actively involve the patient and the users around that too. So that I would say is changing, but it has been very, very slow over more than a decade. The sector as a whole is really sort of struggling to move beyond just doing the technology or the digital transformation for the sake of it, but really understanding what is it you're trying to achieve. So I think from the hospital perspective, I think there's also an element of cultural change as well. People always underestimate the people side of technology. You still have to encourage people to use it, and you still have to be able to, I'm a consultant, so business consultant, one of the things that we always talk about is change management. And that's really important. Otherwise, you have all these amazing bits of technology that nobody uses. And I think one of the things I've observed over recent years is that technology is moving faster than we as humans can cope with. We don't handle change well, generally, as a species. And therefore, as a consequence of that, it's taking longer. The technology's here. It's here. As you saw yesterday, I think it's more around the people and how do you encourage and enable them to, and educate them as well in terms of the use of it.
Hi, Joanna. Good morning.
Yeah.
My name is Mohit. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. And I think what's also very interesting was that you were able to network all the stakeholders, the policymakers, the payers, the patients who obviously were very... And I had many questions, but just for the interest of time, I'll just ask you one. Over a period of time, many decades, we have seen that there are guidelines formulated by, say, a European body or a US body, etc., adapted, customized in different continents, in different countries, whether it's for diabetes or cardiovascular or any other disease. And then the doctors and the healthcare practitioners follow those guidelines. Do you think from a data perspective, especially from a big data analytics point of view, the authorities will use these data analytics and probably over a period of time change these guidelines, which will be very, very customized to city-specific, country-specific, culture-specific, species, I don't know. I mean, it can get to that level. Do you think that's going to happen in the next few decades?
Yeah. Yes, is the short answer to that question. I think that will come. I think what is always interesting, and I've seen in the industry, is that there's this sort of us and them concept between the sort of life sciences organization and the hospitals and things like that, and also the regulators as well. So it's very much a us and them kind of concept. Where I found the most productive sessions and the most value, and this is why I'm thrilled that we've got such a diverse audience here, is that when we all come together, actually being able to make those changes and be informed is really the next sort of step to being able to achieve this. The regulators in each of the different countries, they are also trying to grapple with this. They're also trying to figure out what guidelines do we give, what regulations do we put in place to be able to deal with this sort of huge amount of emergent technology and the data associated with it. They are also having to evolve. And so actually sort of doing that in collaboration, and I've seen that with a number of organizations, is really where you kind of work together and demonstrate, okay, we're going to do this because this, and we're going to ensure pharmacovigilance based on the previous discussion. We're going to ensure that we have these risk management and pharmacovigilance processes in place to be able to manage it, the GXP sort of regulations and the implications around that as well, really helps to sort of break down that mentality of us and them. So,
There is one question, please.
last one. You've been patiently waiting.
Hello. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of your slides mentioned, connect plus combine plus data. That's really powerful. But at the same time, when you look at data like healthcare data, that is not allowed to cross the boundary of a sovereignty or a country, etc. Now, while we are grappling with handling, diseases, etc., and coming out with medicines for a global population, this is kind of working contrary. So how do you take that data and say that this extrapolated data is actually going to work with a particular ethnic group and will not work with another group? For example, if you take the Asian populations, like for India, and then you do AI or machine learning or deep learning on that, that could be very, very narrow focus on that particular ethnic group. How do you take that data and apply it to somebody like an Hispanic group or a Chinese group? What are your thoughts on that?
So what we're seeing is a lot more, this comes down to sort of this personalization element as well. I think then that is sort of in between from the sort of mass production where one size fits all to sort of segment-based to individual-based. So what we're seeing is a lot of countries are actually requiring, in order to get new medication approved, is that they have to then demonstrate that they're conducting trials and that they are demonstrating effectiveness and outcomes within those population segments. That's becoming much more prevalent in, for example, China and other countries as well. So I think this extrapolation, there is always danger in doing that because then there's bias in the data. There's bias also in the algorithms that get created. So you have to figure out a way of minimizing that bias, or at least acknowledging that it's there and not just sort of saying the result is fixed. I think there's this sort of iteration around it as well that's also important in order to be able to kind of improve the accuracy of the algorithms and adapt to the sort of evolution of the different sort of the data and the nuances within that data with regards to different population segments. And actually, ultimately, we're trying to get to a point where it's one treatment, individualized per individual. And that means, there's certainly in some cases, particularly with rare conditions, where clinical trials are being conducted on very, very small cohorts because there aren't that many of them. And therefore, you need to be able to sort of sort of be able to accommodate some of these sort of population segment elements, but then also individual elements too. And that's kind of dictated by the condition too.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.